Bill Wilson, Wilson Combat here again with my old friend Ken Hackathorn. Ken's been a proponent of the 1911 platform handgun for years. He refers to it as the world's finest close quarter fighting handgun, and got one of his Hackathorn specials here on the table. Ken, tell me, what led you to the conclusion that the 1911 is by far the world's finest fighting handgun?
Well, first off, I use that term 1911 is the world's finest close quarters combat weapon. It's a little bit in jest.
Okay.
In that, as you know, there are a lot of people now, particularly younger folks, that didn't grow up with the 1911 and they don't quite know the history of the 1911, that often are critical of it. And they'll say, well, it doesn't have hold enough bullets, or it's not reliable enough. The reality is, and I always tell people, I get it a lot of time. Well, Hackathorn, why do you carry a 1911? This is generally from what I call the Glock crowd. You know, I wouldn't carry one yet. I go, look, you know what? You carry what you want. I get it. That's your business. You know, they work pretty well for me, and I've been carrying one for a long time. It is a unique piece of history. I tell people, there's certain guns that are famous. You know, a lot of people will say, well, the Colt Single Action Army is a real historic gun, and it is. You look at the Smith & Wesson, say, military police revolver, the most tested and used revolver in combat history. The 1911 pistol, certainly introduced in 1911. It's interesting. Here we are over a century later. Not only is it one of the best-selling handguns in the world, certainly America, look at the amount of vendors, it's worked out pretty well for you as far as making a living. So it's still a popular gun, but I understand what some people say they would prefer something else. And one of the reasons, there's two things that I always say, look, one issue is people say about today's standards, in the Glock world, if you will, and make no mistake, the Glock is the other popular fighting pistol in the world. It's the world standard. And everybody says, yeah, but it holds, 17 rounds, or if it's a Glock 19, 15 rounds, and this thing only holds typically as a 45, say 8, or if it's a 9mm, actually with your 10-round magazines, I can put 11 rounds in it. But I always say, look, first off, I understand the emotion of magazine capacity, in that if I laid this pistol on the table and say you made a Wilson Hackathorn special that held only 5 rounds and one that only held 10 rounds, or you made one that held 15 rounds, and you say, okay, Ken, you're going to carry a gun for self-defense, which you want. The emotional part of me says, I'll take 15 rounds. And more bullets is better. The reality is, if you really study what happens when people use handguns to defend themselves, soldiers, police officers, or people in the private sector, the circumstances are usually fairly similar. And rarely does the capacity of the gun ever have anything to do with the outcome, unless you're a really bad shot. So, most shootings are over with in 3 or 4 rounds. Most gunfights quite often result in everybody empties their gun. So the capacity isn't the issue, it's how well you can shoot. If you can shoot well, you don't need 15 rounds. But the emotional part of me tells me I want them. And then the other thing about the 1911 is the reliability. When the 1911 was created, for the first, let's say 50, 60 years of its service, it was built by craftsmen, by skilled gunsmiths who fitted the guns, and everything worked well. And quite honestly, if you go back and look at the original GI guns, say, or the Colts made prior to, say, even in the 70s, 1970s, they were pretty well built, fitted guns, and they were made to feed and function 1 round, 230 grain military spec hardball. Everything about them was built around that, and those guns worked beautifully. Only, and probably in the 1980s, for example, Colt, who was the major vendor of 1911 pistols, that's what we all started with.
Yeah.
They had some issues, not the least of which was a major strike involving the union workers. And Colt, it went on for a great many years. So Colt took a lot of their salary people and put them out in the factory making guns. These were not skilled, trained gunsmiths or fitters. And the quality control of those guns got pretty ugly. You could even say it was some of the worst guns they've ever made. And the reputation of the 1911 pistol suffered severely because of the fact that Colt destroyed the reputation. I mean, there was a period I would have never carried one. They were junk. Now, by the way, today Colt's making the best 1911 pistols they've made in 35 years. But a lot of other people decided to get into the 1911 business because the demand was very high. A lot of it because of that Ipsy created a demand for the gun. You had to have a 1911 to be competitive. You know that, I know that. That's what took you from a revolver to a 1911.
Oh, that's why we revolver, Browning high power, 1911. By the third match, I was shooting 1911.
Yeah. So the end result is a lot of people are making 1911 pistols this day. Some of them make good guns. A lot of them make guns that are assembled. They're not fitted. And this is a technology that requires a fitted gun. Mm-hmm. If you just want to draw parts together and put it out the door, it's probably not going to work real well. No. The Glock, on the other hand, is a gun that was never designed to be fitted. It's a gun that you take the parts and you train anybody to basically put it together, you got a functional gun. So that's something you got to understand. But a 1911 that is correct, properly fitted, is extremely reliable. The thing that I've always been impressed with, and I know, Bill, you came to love and learn, is they're really easy to shoot well.
Yeah.
The trigger itself is, you can get a great trigger. If the guns are tuned properly, like your Wilson Combat guns and fitted up, they're incredibly accurate. They come with great sights. The aesthetics are good, but the functional, the location of the magazine release. A lot of people will say, well, it's got a manual safety. You know what? Once you know how to use the manual safety, it's an incredibly safe gun.
Yes.
And it gets back to this. I tell people, if I were to lay this pistol on the table and let's say a Glock and a Smith M&P and some other guns and say, okay, Ken, we're going to have a little shooting contest and Bill's challenged you and you're going to have to shoot the most accurate shooting performance you can. Pick a pistol. I would almost always guarantee I'll pick up a 1911 because I know I can shoot it better than some of the other guns. So that has always been with me. Tell you an interesting story, Bill. When I was about 14 years old, I always wanted a 45 because I grew up, remember, in the shadow of World War II. My dad and everybody I knew was a veteran of World War II. So the Army 45 was something we were all intrigued with. And by the way, when I was growing up, the cool guy guns were either a Luger or a 357 Magnum. If you're a cool guy, that's the gun you wanted to have. But I had like I say, an after-school job, and on the way home in the town I lived in, there was a couple of sporting goods stores, and one was a little place that was sold basically fishing supplies and stuff, but they had some guns and hunting stuff. And I remember going in there one day, rode my bicycle, and went in looking around, and the guy that owned the place kind of tolerated, and looking in the rack of handguns in the display case, and there is a Parkerized 1911 A1 pistol. It was a Remington Rand, and I was like, oh man. So Sir, can I look at it? He gets it out and he hands it to me, and there it is. The price tag was $22.50. Now, mind you, this is like 1962 or so. So that was kind of the norm. They were $25 back then. But the first time I'd seen one in place, oh my God, I got to have this. So I asked him, can I buy this and make payments? And he said, oh, how much can you make? And I said, how if I pay you $7 a week? He said, okay. And that's what I could spare out of what I made from my after-school job. And he said, son, when you come to get this gun, you're going to have one of your parents going to have to come. That was pre-68, but he said, your mom or dad or somebody going to have to come, or I won't sell you the gun. So I paid it off until I got the 20. I was ready for my last installment. My dad went with me, and my dad went in, and anyway, I paid for it. By the way, I had $22.50. I didn't have enough money for tax. My dad had to kick in the tax. So I've got the gun. No bullets for it, no ammo or anything, but I got the gun. And we're driving home, and my dad, I'm fiddle around with the gun, and my dad said, well, son, you can't hit anything with a 45, And I said, oh, no. He said, no, I can tell you, those things you can't hit anything with, because that was his experience in the military. So my sidekick, Mike Patterson, was my shooting buddy. We're all jazzed up. Man, you got an Army 45. So back then, you could go into like a sporting goods store or a gun shop, and you could buy individual rounds. Most of them had a box of ammo, and if it had an X on it with like a marker or crayon, that means it was an open box. I can remember and ammo was expensive. I mean, I think I paid like maybe 18 or 19 cents a round for 2 30 grain hardball, which is a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
So we had enough money between us. We bought 7 rounds, a magazine worth of ammo. So we get on our bikes and we ride home. And Mike lived kind of on the edge of town, so we go in the kitchen, gets one of his mom's pie plates, out in the garage, hammer, nail, book it up into the woods behind his house, nail that pie pan up on a tree, load up the magazine, no ear protection, no eyes, nothing. I'm first, my gun, right, loaded up, blam, ears ringing, gun wham. Anyway, I banged off 7 rounds, I think, and honestly, it was probably 7 or 8 yards. And I think I hit the eye pan once on the edge. I'm like, so I handed it to Mike, and he's got his 7 rounds. He loads it up, and he bangs away, and I think he hit it twice. We're like, pretty silent, right? So we've got the empty gun, ears ringing like crazy, and we're walking back the trail down through the woods, and his dad had been a World War II Marine, and his son said the same thing, you can't do anything with a 45. So we're walking down, and we kind of looked at each other and went, I guess Dad was right. So
great.
I was like, what have I done? So I told one of my buddies that I had this gun. He's like, oh man, sell it to me. I remember taking it in my gym bag to school. I sold it to him the next week for $25. That was my first experience with 1911. And I kind of concluded, well, my other gun I wanted was a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum. I wanted a Model 27, but I could only afford Model 28 hybrid.
Well, I got to interject my first experience with a 1911. I like you, a big-time revolver shooter, and I was actually, as you were, a really good shot with a revolver. Got the 1911 Llama.
Oh, Llama.
Yeah, bought a Llama 45, a box of ammo. Same thing. Go out the river, set up some stuff to shoot at out the river, and no ear protection, no eye protection, nothing. I loaded up, first magazine, and I'm just, blamming away, and about the third shot, the barrel bushing fails, and the recoil spring plug and the recoil spring goes pew in the river. That was, I didn't even get through the first magazine with my first 1911.
Well, those things were famous, and I told people, generally in the first 150 rounds, you could see parts flying off of them.
I didn't get to the first magazine.
That's why Spanish guns had a bad reputation. But so I kind of abandoned the 45. A few years later, the guy that was my neighbor, Charlie Gillis, the guy was kind of got me interested in guns a little. He had a 45, and he knew what he was doing, and he kind of gave me some pointers to shooting a pistol. And after I shot it a little bit, and he basically was trigger manipulation, and I kind of figured, hey, you can shoot one of these things. So I set out on a quest to buy it, and the next gun I bought was a GI, World War II Colt 1911A1, and then I started shooting. And back then, you could buy GI hardball, basically, military ammo for like $2.50. There's a local guy who was in a National Guard or something, and he would get ammo and sell it in a local sporting goods store. So I'd go in for $2.50. I could buy a box of ammo. And that was a pretty good deal even then. So I'd buy a box every week, and I was shooting 1911. I actually got to the point where I was pretty decent with it.
Did you pick up the hearing protection at that point, or you're still having
No,
your
you know
ears
what?
ringing?
Believe it or not, when you started shooting and I started shooting, if anybody that wore ear protection was a pussy. So I never wore any. And even when I was in the military, there was no such thing as ear pro. I remember guys taking cigarette butts, sticking their butt anyway. The end result, one of the reasons that I obviously at this point in life have a pretty severe hearing loss is because I wasn't smart enough to wear any kind of ear pro. And it wasn't prevalent. I never even saw a set of earmuffs, if you will, until probably sometime in the early 70s when they became kind of the norm. And of course, as we know, based on the recoil cycle in 1911, as far as hearing damage, they're one of the worst. So, but I from then on, I kept always having a 1911 around. And it's interesting, when IPSC got started, I was, carrying a 1911, but then as a duty gun. But obviously, the ammunition supply was an issue, so I had to start reloading. And I bought a Lyman Spar T. That's the press that you can put the dies on, so after you can just turn the head. And so I started reloading, and like a lot of guys, that was an expensive venture. So I could afford, you go out and pick up your brass, and if you went to the range and you shot 200 rounds, you're probably lucky to come home with 75 cases because you lost them in the grass and stuff. So I would come home and I loaded, 4.5 grains of bullseye, 200 grain number 68 bullet, and that's what I shot a lot of. The interesting thing is that people don't realize back in that era when we started, say, in IPSC, a what was the loading machine? You got a bunch of the old ones. Star loading machine was nearly $1,000. Mm-hmm. That was a huge amount. Only the most dedicated or the most affluent people could afford one. Most of us loaded single stage presses, and so you couldn't have the volume of practice ammo. And I mean, I was not making much money. I mean, the thought of buying a Star press for me was virtually an impossibility. I often tell people the thing that did the most to contribute to pistol shooting skill in America in the last 50 years was Mike Dillon.
Yep.
He made reloading on a progressive machine affordable. Mm-hmm. And once I got a 550, man, the world changed. So I always tell people, I've been around the gun. I've carried it most of my life. I've shot it a lot. And people often tell me, well, that gun doesn't work. And I say, real simple. If you get an 1911 doesn't work, get it fixed. If you can't get it fixed, that's why we have gun shows. Take it and get rid of it and get one that does. And so even though people often tell me that, well, I don't think it's a good choice for gun, I go, that's fine for you. It works good for me. I have no lack of confidence for carrying a 1911 pistol. And people often say to me, well, do you ever carry anything else? Yeah, I sure do. In the training business, I've been, because it's a Glock world, I use a Glock a lot in the training because that's what you should be using what the students use. Yeah. And of course, one of the big changes in the 1911 world, obviously, I think one of the biggest revolutions, certainly in the last few years, is the new X9 that you brought out. And I think that for the people who want a 15-shot 1911 pistol, that's the next step. But nonetheless, carrying a single-stack 1911, as you know, you've visited me, my kind of everyday carry gun is an old CQB I got from you a long time. It's been rebuilt twice. That's when I get up in the morning, it's the gun I put on. When I go to bed at night, it's going to take off. Now, I shoot a 9mm because the 45 at this point, all that 45 ball ammo, all that 44 Magnum, all that stuff, I beat my hands up pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And if I were to go out today and shoot, say, 200 rounds of 45 hardball, I wouldn't be able to hold on to my spoon to have cereal in the morning. So I've kind of relegated myself to shooting 9s. And the plus we have is that thanks to the change in ammunition technology, the 9mm round is actually a really good choice in round. But I love a 45. I still shoot them some.
With your old geezer load.
I call it the old geezer load. I want a round that doesn't beat me up. I use a 185 grain version of the number 68 bullet, 4.3 of Clay's. And you shot it when you were my, so an old guy, I can shoot a bunch of it without hurting. But I'll give you an example, Bill. I got a lot of 45s, not as many as you. I don't think anybody's got as many as you do, but I went to a gun shop a couple weekends ago. Went to a gun show in Montana, stopped in a gun shop. Naturally looking around. I don't pay much attention to the polymer guns or running the black gun stuff. And I look in the gun case and I looked under, and there's a Remington Rand GI 45, and it's a used one. It's not a mint condition gun. So the kid that runs the shop says, let me look at that. He gets it out, look at it. It's an honest, honest GI 1911A1. Holster wear, clean, no apologies. And there's got a price tag of $1,200 on it.
That sounds pretty steep.
But in today's market, that's actually not a bad price. If you try pricing one. So I asked him, what's the best you can do on that? And he said, it's a consignment gun. I can't. He said, a widow whose husband carried it, when he was in the military. He's passed. She brought it in to sell it. She wants $1,200. I look it over real good. Everything's correct. I'm thinking, man, the first one I paid $22.50 for. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
He said, I can call her if you want to make an offer. So I said, well, okay. He said, what's your offer? I said, $1,000. Even then, I'm choking a little bit and to say that. And he said, hey, I've already had 2 people offer that, and she's turned it down. I said, okay, $1,050. I said, okay. Calls her. Gets up. He said, she said she'd really like to have $1,100. I said, well, then she can keep it. He said, well, she said if you said that, you can have it for $1,050. So I bought it, took it home. My buddy was with me. Does my FFL transfers. He picked it up, took it home. We transferred it to me in Idaho. Take it to the house and clean it up. It's bone dry, all the dried oil and stuff. Clean it up. The only thing that had been done to it, the old geezer had painted, dabbed a little yellow on the front sight, which we understand.
Oh yeah, we understand that.
So I loaded up, get some 230 grain ball, load about 3 mags, go down the range, 20 yards, shoot it. Man, it's right on the money. I shoot a group about like that.
Yeah, with those old GI guns that don't shoot well, right?
Those guns that aren't accurate.
Yeah.
And I looked at the thing and I said, this is like, Armand Swenson used to say, this is back when they made guns to save lives and win wars, not to make a buck.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I finally wiped it off, I cleaned it up, put the rig on it, put it in the rug, stuck it in the gun safe with all the rest of them, and kind of went, why did I buy this? And the reason is because I like them.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, I can't believe I paid that much for the gun. The truth of the matter is that gun on the market today is probably an $1,800 to $2,000 gun in today's current 1911 military pistol market. That's why I bought it. I try to rationalize that anyway. But the bottom line is I like 1911s. I've always had confidence in them. I shoot them well. Let's face it, when you pick up a 1911 pistol, you're picking up something American.
Mm-hmm. In history.
Yeah, and it's a piece of who we are and what we're about. So I would say that as long as I can shoot, as long as I can pack a gun, I will probably pack a 1911 pistol.
Cool.
And I know you're not too much. You have this affliction for Berettas. But the reality is we both like Berettas.
Mm-hmm.
And we both shoot. I can remember when the Beretta M9 pistol came out. Those of us who were loyal 1911 guys were somewhat offended, remember? They're going to replace the 1911.
I remember like yesterday when we were at the SHOT Show and Beretta made the announcement of getting that. It's like, the world's coming to an end.
Yeah. And I remember the same thing. I was just offended. Mm-hmm. I started calling them pizza pistols. But I was doing military training. And I finally realized, if I'm going to have to teach this gun, I better get one and learn to use it. So I got a Warren Barron at the time who worked for Beretta. I said, Warren, I need one. He said, okay, he sent me one. Give me a good price. I got it. I remember looking at it and going, So I started shooting it. And, I discovered something. They're really pretty good guns. Mm-hmm. Incredibly reliable. Really accurate, soft shooting. And I tell people, nobody's like you, but I got a lot of Berettas. And you got more than anybody on the earth. But we've all learned it. The reality is the Beretta is a superb pistol. Yeah. And, you're about to introduce a new one here in a matter of days. And I've already seen it and shot it, and I'm on the list, right? But the kicker is I've got a lot of different guns, and I love shooting them, and because I'm a gun guy. But I don't think I will ever lose my interest or my pride of carrying and using a 1911 pistol.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Cool.
Thanks for visiting again.